Today I'm going to give you a tutorial on how I did this Zuko edit from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Alright, so here's the initial image that I started with, and I knew I wanted to take this shadow here and use it in the image just to make the lighting consistent. And when I saw the image, I knew that I wanted to use the lighting as a source from the fire that Zuko uses. So I knew that the lighting was going to come directly from the fire effect. So what I did was I cut this out with a pen tool, the subject first, and I took my time and I did a really good job to cut the subject out first. So I did that with the pen tool, and I right click, make selection, and I did that by 1 pixel to kind of feather the edges, because the edges will never be sharp in the real world, especially if you're going for photorealism. So I made sure to blur the edges by 1 pixel. So after I did that, I made sure to get the shadow as well. And what I did was I did the same thing. I made sure to cut this out exactly how it was, and on these edges I just did like a rough cut where I thought it might be, because I knew I was gonna blur it in the image, so it didn't have to be like perfectly accurate or anything like that. So I just cut out the shadow, and in this part I just went over it and kind of connected it down here just like that. And this is what I ended up with. And after I used the pen tool and made the selection, I just filled it with black instead of using the actual ground, because it had all that texture that I probably wasn't going to use, and I knew I was going to replace the ground. So I just filled it with black to make the shadow, and I ended up using a Gaussian blur at 18 pixels to give it a little bit of a blur, and it was perfect for this image. So after I had done this, this was the initial thing that I did. I didn't have to do too much to the hair because it was pretty good already. So I was pretty happy with this. So I started to put in the images that I wanted to, and this process takes quite a while for me because I like to play with a bunch of different backgrounds and grounds and different kinds of compositions, and so this is the final composition I came up with. It's this ground that I found on a stock photography website, and I used a tilt shift blur from the blur gallery. So just go filter, blur gallery, tilt shift, and I did that by 15 pixels, and I did it right here where the subject was standing to kind of give it that photorealistic look. Oh, and this shadow I painted away with white on a black mask. Just some of the top part to fade it away a bit. So I played around with a bunch of different backgrounds, and this is the one I came up with. I also got it from a stock photography website. I made it brighter with a curves adjustment layer, just a little bit up in the mid tones. And for the ground, the color grade was for with color balance adjustment layer with a bunch of red on it, a curves adjustment layer where I go down on the exposure on the far right side, and I did a little bit of a curve up right there to make the lighting consistent with the scene. So I knew I was going to put a fire effect on the back and use the lighting on the subject to make everything consistent. So I made a fire lights for the fire on the back, just because I knew I was going to do that, and I did that with a curves adjustment layer. And I went into the reds, went up in the midtones, blues went down for yellow, so opposite of blue is yellow. Nothing with the greens, and I increased the overall exposure with the RGB selection. And that gave me a nice glow on the ground. Alright, so this is something I also found on a stock photography website. I'll put the link in the description so you guys can check that out. And they just have a bunch of photos that you can use for commercial purposes. And it's really cool and awesome that these artists are allowing us to use these assets. And most professionals will use other people's assets as well, so don't feel bad if you do. So this 3D rendered balcony asset was a bit complicated with the shadows. So there was a light source coming from the back, and I felt like the light source from the back would be a little bit more than the light source coming from the fire on the subject. So I made the shadows coming inward. And so with these shadows it was a bit complicated for me. So what I did was I just copied and pasted the balcony layer. Just Alt Option and click and drag below it, and it will copy and paste the selected layer. And so when I was doing this, I didn't have the blur gallery, so I'll just delete this. So we have this now, and it's just a copied version of what we had already. So what I do here is Control or Command L, and it'll bring up the Levels tab for this selected layer. And I will bring the exposure all the way down. So bring this to the left side and it'll make it completely black. So I'm gonna just go ahead and convert to Smart Object to finalize that layer just for the tutorial. And as you can see, it's just all black. So what I did was I Control or Command T and flip vertical, and I lined it up. And this is a good way to make shadows for complicated objects in Photoshop. And I made sure to skew it to the side a bit to make it a bit more realistic. So that's how I did it, and I added a layer mask with this button right here on these shadows, and I just duplicated it to finish off this side over here. And it's not perfect, but usually people won't, you know, notice these kinds of things, so you don't have to be absolutely perfect on things that aren't the focus of the artwork. So this shadow, I was pretty happy with it. It wasn't, you know, amazing, but it was okay. And so I had to move on from that. So on this balcony layer, the way I color graded it was with a color balance adjustment layer. And I increased yellows and increased reds to color balance, to color grade it according to the rest of the scene. I decreased the exposure to make everything consistent, and I did it just in this corner with this curves adjustment layer. So everything's looking nice and consistent. And for a final touch, I did another curves adjustment layer and went into the reds, increased it. Went into the blues, I decreased it to increase yellows. So opposite of blue is yellow. And it made it even more consistent with the scene. So this is just a copy and pasted of that shadow that I did. So this initial one that I was talking about was more for the bottom of his feet, to make it darker around the base of the subject, because that's how shadows are. They're darker in the beginning and they fade out a little bit. So that's how I made that effect. Alright, so this is my dodge and burn for skin retouching. And if you want to learn more about skin retouching, I have a video, and I will put that in the description. And I will also make a card for YouTube. And you should see it on the screen. But I did dodge and burn for this image for skin retouching. So this is before, and this is after skin retouching. So for dodge and burn, I just decrease it with a curves adjustment layer with a black mask for darkening areas, and the rest are brightening. And I use a soft brush at a flow of 4% and do very small adjustments until I'm happy with the image. So as you can see in these areas, it drastically changes the face. And these are just small adjustments, and they make a huge difference. Alright, so I wanted the light to be coming from the fire. So I used a hue and saturation adjustment layer to achieve that. And what I did was I colorized it, made it orange color, increased saturation, and decreased the lightness a bit to give it a orange glow. And also I double clicked the layer and I separated this to take it out of the shadows. So if I did this, the effect would be in the shadows as well. But when I press Alter option and separate these, it will start coming out of the shadows, which it probably would not be realistically. So this is a good way to do that. So now that effect is only in the highlights. I also kind of made it a little bit brighter up top on the head with a screen layer and just orange painted on top. And I did the same thing. I did not want that in the black areas, so the darkest areas of the image, because it wouldn't be there. I darkened the back foot because I found it a bit distracting, and it wasn't really fitting with the shadows and the rest of the image, I felt like. So I just used a curves adjustment layer and decreased the exposure on the right. Alright, so this is a global dodge and burn on the subject only. So I do micro dodge and burns for skin retouching, and then I'll do a global dodge and burn, where global is the whole image, but specifically on this subject. So I did bigger areas of dodge and burn with a curves adjustment layer, and here's the dark dodge, or the dark burn. So this is dodge and this is burn. Alright, so here's the flame image that I got on a stock photography website. So it's just a bunch of these. It's the same thing, or the same image, and what I did was I pressed L and used the lasso tool to kind of select different areas of this fire, and controller command C, controller command V to copy and paste, and now I have this, and I just kind of built off of that and put them into screen blending mode to take away the black areas and reveal the highlighted areas. And I just used that image a couple times to build the flame that I wanted. And that was the final result. I did put a blur on the one in the foreground because I felt like it was really close to the camera, where the camera would be, and I really like to make my images more photorealistic, so I'll use the blurring and the blur gallery to kind of make it more like a photo. So I love to use black and white adjustment layer to do tonal contrast, and basically what that is to bring down the contrast that I don't want in the image, or to bring down the tones that I don't want to be the focal point, and bring up the tones that I do want to be the focal point. So this is a really powerful tool to use for tonal contrast, and it really changes the look of the image altogether. And sometimes I do this before and after the global color grade. So in this case I did it before, and possibly after. But yeah, this is what I do for tonal contrast. So go adjustment layer, black and white, and it will make your image black and white. And this is really good for black and white images as well. But I use it for tonal contrast by putting it into luminosity blending mode. And when I do that, I can use it without the black and white. And this is what I came up with in the end. So here's before and after the tonal contrast. Alright, so with this fire I wanted to make a bloom effect that you see a lot of times in photographs. So what I did was just put a layer into screen blending mode and selected a color and you know, put a little bit on the bright areas to kind of make it overflowing a little bit. And I did it again with a darker orange. And I use the healing brush tool in some of these areas that I found distracting to me. So there's this black area and this line right here that I didn't like. So I took that away. Alright, so this is the global color grade. So the way I like to do global color grading initially, at least, is camera raw filter. So I'll go ahead and show you some of these things that I did here. So when I go here, I kind of prep it for my final touch later on. So this doesn't look like the image that I want in the end, but I know that it's gonna help me achieve that image in the end. And that just kind of takes time, and over time you'll develop a way that you do it yourself. So this is the way I like to do it. And every image is different, so you just kind of have to play it by ear. But in this stage of my edit, I'm trying to prep for the final result. So I'm happy with everything that's in here. I'm happy with the composition and the lighting and the consistency of the lighting. And now I'm trying to go in and add some final touches here. So I decreased the exposure a little bit, added contrast, increased the highlights. I wanted to make this a bit moody and contrasty because it's kind of like sunset, and Zuko is this firebender, and it's perfect for a moody image. So I'm making it super dark. I increased the vibrance and decreased the clarity. Let's see. Yeah, so I increased the lights and the whites and the highlights, and it decreased the exposure, and that kind of makes it like a little bit contrasty and good for moody pictures. So I matted the image by increasing this value right here, and it will go from where it makes the blacks gray. So the more you go up here, the more gray the blacks get. So I put it about here. I was happy with that. And this is drastic for me. I usually don't do it that much, but I wanted this to kind of have that look. Alright, I increased the saturations on the blues because they're super unsaturated in the back, and I wanted it to kind of have that blue look to it. And I kind of further changed the tonal values with luminance sliders. So I kind of made those this fire pop by increasing the oranges and decreasing the reds. I always like to use vignetting, so I put a little bit of a vignette on it. And that is it. And I knew this wasn't going to be the final image, but I knew that it was great for, you know, what I wanted to do later on. So sometimes, let's see. Okay, so this is a kind of like a dodge and burn a little bit. There wasn't enough exposure in the face, so I added a 0.50 exposure, and let's see. Yeah, I took it away from the black areas. So I press Alt or Option and separated these two and kind of put it. I took it away from the dark areas in the image to make it a bit more realistic. And I put that on the face and put it on the highlighted areas. It's kind of make the focal point of the image more apparent. So the image was way too dark when I did the color grading, and I've been doing this a lot lately. So I'll make an exposure adjustment layer and increase the exposure and take it away from the highlighted areas, because when you increase the exposure, these highlights are getting super blown out and it doesn't look good. So what I'm looking for is a very good exposure all around, and this is how I've been doing it lately. So I double click and press Alt or Option and take it out of the highlights to only bring up the exposure in these darkest areas. So the image is a bit more readable and you can see it a little bit better. Alright, so these are the global color grade adjustments that I did in the end. I really like this blue area in the back, and I wanted to bring that into the rest of the image. So what I did was I used a color balance adjustment layer, went into the shadows and increased the blues. And then I also did that thing where you double click the layer and take it out of the highlights. So here on this one, I'm only doing the shadows. And on this next one, I did it for only the highlights. So I went into the highlights and increased the yellows and did the exact opposite. I pressed Alt or Option, separated these two to feather it, and I put it only in the highlighted areas. So I found this technique that I saw a artist that I really admired doing, and at first I was very questionable about it, and I tried it on a few of my images in the beginning and I didn't like it, but now I've been doing it a lot lately actually. So normally I would just use a high pass filter for sharpening, but this artist did a second one and he increased it by 60. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. So I'm pressing Control or Command Alt or Option plus Shift plus E to compile the image to the very top. Everything that we've done already. And I'll convert to Smart Objects, go Filter, Other, High Pass, and this is how I sharpen my pictures. So usually I go from anywhere from 2 to 4 to sharpen the edges and the eyes for a really good sharpen. But lately I've been doing one like that and then one at 60. So the one at 60 I put in soft light blending mode and reduce the opacity by quite a bit. And as you can see, it makes it have this certain look to it. And it makes it a bit more consistent as well. So I went ahead and did that, so I'm going to delete that. So this one is that, and this is at 32%. So it's subtle, but it does give it a certain look that I kind of like. And then this one is only in the face area, and it was really hard for me to get the image sharp for some reason. So usually I go with overlay, but I went ahead and did linear light on this one. And on the mask, I inverted it by pressing Ctrl or Command I and painting white only in the face. And I found that if I did this really hard sharpening on hair, it would make it look almost greasy. So I avoid the hair and only do like the eyes and like the T area. And in this case I did the jaw. Just depends. But yeah, I just did the face area for that. So for my monitor, it makes the reds really bright for some reason, and I cannot fix it. I've tried like so many different things to fix it, but I can't, and it just ends up ruining other colors. So what I do for my image personally, because of my monitor, is this selective color adjustment layer, and I just increase the reds. So I go into reds and go opposite of cyan is red. So I increase those reds because I know that it's not gonna look good or the way that I wanted it to. Let's see. This one is blues. So I did a selected color adjustment layer and increase the blues. So the opposite of yellow is blue. And that kind of gave it a more saturation, and it's a type of saturation that isn't gonna pixelate. So selective color adjustment layer is really good for increasing saturation without it being too overwhelming and pixelated. And that was just my watermark. Let's see. And I always do this. It's really good. People do it for movie posters. People called finishers always do this for movie posters, and it brings the image together. So you'll always have different noise levels on compositing, unless you're intentionally taking every single picture that you're going to put into the composite at the same level or around the same level of noise. But this will also get rid of banding as well. So I always put noise on top of my images now. So the way that I do it and the way most finishers do it would be to press Alt or Option and press New Layer. And go into soft light and fill with soft light neutral color 50% gray, and that will give you a layer that's 50% gray and in soft light blending mode. And from here I always convert to smart object because sometimes you have to change the noise levels, and it's just better to have it in smart object so you can change it easy. And go filter, noise, add noise. And I like to do it in Gaussian in monochromatic. You can do uniform without monochromatic. But this is the one that I like the most, and it makes my pictures look really good. In my personal opinion, I like it the most. And for this image, I'm going to get rid of this one because I already did it. Let's see. So for this image, I did a lot of noise. Just because I thought it looked good and it was super nice and consistent throughout the whole image. Usually I do it around 20%, sometimes even 10% if it doesn't look good. But for this, I did 30%. So for each image, it's going to be different, and you just have to determine what you want to do for each image. And that is the final result for my Zuko composite. Alright guys, I hope that you learned a little bit from this, and if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. Please check out my Instagram account because I have a bunch of content on there. I also have mini tutorials that I use 10 carousels to give you a little bit of a mini tutorial on a few of my images. So check that out if you're interested, and I'm very active on Instagram as well. So if you want to hire me for commission work, please feel free to send me a DM on Instagram, and that's where I run most of my business from. So feel free to DM me anytime. I will be streaming Photoshop on Fridays on Twitch, so if you're interested in coming to hang out and asking me questions in person, please feel free to go ahead and go over to Twitch, and I am at jfarm_. So I'd be happy to answer any questions and hang out with you guys. So if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. It would very greatly help me out, and I would very much appreciate that. That's all I have for you guys. Have a good one.